So Muhammad, as depicted in the Islamic texts, was born in 570 Arabia, Mecca. And in the year 610, when he was 40 years old, he was praying in a cave on a mountain outside Mecca. And there appeared to him a being. And in standard Islamic history, this represented the angel Gabriel. According to Islamic text sources, it was Gabriel the angel who appeared to Muhammad to give him the Qur'an over the period of the 23 years subsequent to the first meeting. However, if you look at the earliest records, there is no mention of Gabriel and the being is not identified. What it does mention is Muhammad was depicted as being absolutely terrified by the vision. He thought he was possessed by a demon, which is a strange response to an encounter with an angel, especially if it's Gabriel, one of the most loving angels to God there's ever known about. According to the Islamic text, after that he went home shivering with fear and told his wife Khadija to cover him with a blanket because he was trembling. And then he told her what happened. Ultimately, she took him to her uncle, Waraka bin Nafal, who was a Christian priest, and he explained to Muhammad. And all this, remember, according to the earliest Islamic sources, and that he was a prophet, and that being was Gabriel, the angel. However, this is very strange because if Gabriel was terrifying, he was supposed to be terrifying, and in the very first encounter, he was so terrifying that Muhammad said he thought he was going to die. He was pressed so hard by this being that he thought he was going to die. Now, ordinarily, when one encounters various religious traditions, when there are encounters with spiritual beings, when one is terrified, threatened, and frightened, generally that being is not bringing good. Anyhow, and this is the dilemma that is presented to us in the earliest Islamic texts. This is supposed to be the angel Gabriel, the messenger of Allah, the only God. And clearly, he's working on a basis of violence and intimidation. He's terrifying Muhammad into submission. And later on, there's more strange aspects to the story. Gabriel starts to visit him regularly, but he stops at some point. And when he stops, Muhammad goes up to the top of the mountain, and he's going to throw himself off and commit suicide. Now, this is also a strange reaction to what is supposed to be a benign heavenly being. In any case, Gabriel is identified as the angel and visits Muhammad on a regular basis over the next 23 years and gives him what becomes known as the Qur'an, the holy book of Islam. The Qur'an. This is how the Qur'an becomes into existence. And in the Qur'an, the holy book of Islam, we see the same violence and intimidation that Gabriel first displayed to Muhammad in the first encounter that they had. It's the same all the way through, that the Prophet Muhammad is supposed to submit and be a slave to Allah. And then the non-Muslims are supposed to submit and be slaves to the Muslims. And all of the whole superstructure of Islam, women are supposed to submit and be slaves to men. The whole thing is based on submission and intimidation and fear. Nowadays, of course, you can see this very clearly with the Taliban. The Taliban believe they're carrying out the teachings of Muhammad and following the example of Muhammad. And so, Muhammad said that Allah will pour molten lead into the ears of people who listen to music. And so they go and break the musical instruments. This creates fear and intimidation among people who listen to music and the musicians themselves. And in a microcosm, it is the same phenomenon all over again, that the people are terrified into submission. And that is the Islamic vision for the world. Very, very briefly, the career of Muhammad started out in Mecca with him preaching. And now this is, again, a source of great deal of controversy. And I should say a great deal of misinformation and disinformation, because Muhammad is preaching. He only gathers a small band of followers by the first 10 years of his career, and as a prophet from 610 to 622. He's preaching tolerance. But this is only at the beginning. In the Qur'an, in chapter 109, it says to the unbelievers, I do not worship what you worship, and you do not worship what I worship. You will not worship what I worship, and I will not worship what you worship. Your religion, and to me, mine. Now that is rather grudgingly put, but nonetheless a statement of tolerance. Let's leave each other alone, basically it says. We have different points of view. However, this was only something that Muhammad preached when the Muslims were a small band. When they grew larger, and later on, when Muhammad went from Mecca to Medina, another city in Arabia, he began to preach warfare against unbelievers. This is another thing they use. They say Islam is a religion of peace, because they look at the beginning when he was talking to a small band. But once he talks to a large group after a few years, the whole thing changes. And just because he preached tolerance at the beginning to a small band doesn't make it a bloody religion of peace anyway. It's just a fucking... When the Muslims grew in number and gained power, now this is very important, because in Islam everything Muhammad did is exemplary. Chapter 33 verse 21 of the Qur'an says that Muhammad is an excellent example for you. An excellent example is not qualified. In other words, there is no limitation on that excellent example. Everything Muhammad did is good and to be imitated by the Muslim. Consequently, when the Muslims are a small band and Muhammad is preaching tolerance, when you have Muslims who are a small group in a particular nation, they will preach tolerance and peace. But when they grow in numbers and power, you will find that they are preaching a very different message. Muhammad in the year 622 was invited, according to the Islamic tradition, by the people of Yathrib, which is a nearby city which later on was renamed as Medina, or Medina Nabi, the city of the Prophet. He was invited to come and be a political and military leader of the city, as well as the religious leader and they would convert to Islam. Once there, he began to preach that Allah was giving him revelations about the necessity in the first place to fight defensive wars against the unbelievers, and then to fight offensive wars against the unbelievers in order to bring them under the hegemony of Islam, to convert them to Islam. Or if they refused to convert to Islam, then to make them submit to the hegemony of the Islamic law and to recognize their degraded status in this world as well as in the next, as a punishment from Allah for refusing to accept Islam. The Qur'an is full of this sort of thing. Warnings that the unbelievers will be punished in this world, and not just in hellfire, and the punishment in this world is to be enforced by the Muslims themselves, who will terrorize, strike terror in the hearts of the unbelievers. And this is what it says. It literally says this sort of shit. This is in chapter 8, verse 60 of the Qur'an. And bring them into submission to Islamic law, which guarantees them a second-class status. Now, this is something that Muslims have put into practice throughout history. In the first era of Islam, there were caliphates. Caliphates. Is that right? Caliphates? Caliphates? Caliphates. Caliphate. Caliphates. Caliphate. Caliphates. Caliphates. The caliphs were caliph means successor. Caliph means successor. And so the caliphs were, the caliphs, were the successors of Muhammad as the political, military, and spiritual leaders of the Islamic world. And just as Muhammad did, they led offensive wars against the neighboring states in order to bring them under the hegemony of the Islamic world. When the Arabs first came out of Arabia after the death of Muhammad in 632, Islam was actually an inchoate state and was not fully, is that right? Inchoate state was not fully formulated dogmatically as it is today. However, those conquests in Islamic traditions have been ascribed to the imitation of Muhammad, who called for warfare against unbelievers, making the heart of the Islamic world the Middle East, North Africa and Persia, out of what has been Christian and Zoroastrian areas. And they were conquered then. According to the Qur'an, they were subjugated under the hegemony of the Muslims. The non-Muslims were made to submit. This is in direct exemplary imitation of Muhammad as a being, as commanding that Muslims must fight against the unbelievers. First invite them to accept Islam, then if they refuse, ask them to pay the jizya, which is the tax specified in chapter 9, verse 29 of the Qur'an, a tax and tribute to the Muslims as a sign of one's submission to their hegemony. And if they refuse both, to go to war against them. This is the paradigmatic basis. Paradigmatic. This is the paradigmatic basis for Islam warfare that conquered a tremendous area of the world. By 732, 100 years after Muhammad died, there was a massive Islamic empire stretching from Spain into India. And of course, the Jihad against India was especially particularly virulent because they were not the Hindus in India. They were not the Hindus in India. They were considered the people of the book. That is the Qur'an's designation for Jews and Christians and Zoroastrians. And they were therefore even treated more violently than the rest of them, and not immediately given the option to submit. Although that was later extended to them because the sheer numbers made it impossible for the Muslims to kill them all, although there were certainly attempts to do so. Now, I hope you understood all of that, what all that meant. It just means that the Islam religion, the people, the Muslims, spread through Europe and Africa very quickly, and Persia, North Africa, and the Middle East very, very quickly, because they went to war against them, trying to bring everybody into Islam, following Muhammad's example of peace. What a peaceful man. Now, all of this comes from Muhammad's life. The war and the conquest is what he pursued in Arabia, and then his followers, in imitation of him, brought it to the rest of the world. There are also aspects of Muhammad as exemplary. For example, in Afghanistan in 2003, when the Taliban was toppled, supposedly, or toppled at least temporarily, the American aid workers went into refugee camps for the displaced people in Afghanistan, and they found that half the girls of second grade age were married, and all of the girls of third grade and above were married. And child marriage is a phenomenon all over the Islamic State. The Ayatollah Khomeini, the Ayatollah Khomeini, the famous founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran, was 28 years old when he married his bride, who was 10 years old. He also recommended that Muslim men marry girls before they reach puberty. In other words, when they're 9-10 years old. Did you hear that? And this is common practice. Now, this is also in the imitation of Muhammad, as depicted in the Islamic tradition. When Muhammad was 51 years old, he married a 6-year-old girl named Aisha, and then consummated the marriage, or in other words, raped her, because, of course, she had no way to refuse consent, when he was 54 and she was 9, because Muhammad is the excellent example, as specified in the Qur'an 33:21, as I noted before. That also is an excellent example, and this is to be considered to be no moral difficulty when seizing a child and raping the child, because Muhammad did it. Also, there is the sexual enslavement of non-Muslim women, or what we would say in the modern world, particularly in India, the raid of Kaaba. Kaaba was an oasis in northern Arabia where the Jewish tribes that Muhammad had previously exiled from Medina had gone to take refuge. But Muhammad ultimately went and invaded Kaaba. Is that how you say it? K-bar? 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 And incidentally, it's worth noting that he arrived there at night, but waited to strike until morning because he wanted to hear if there would be the Islamic call to prayer in the morning. If there was not, he would invade. If there was, he would not, because he was commanded, in other words, according to the Jewish tradition, to fight against the people who, until they confessed that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is the messenger. So if the people of Khaybar had confessed that there was no God but Allah and Muhammad was the messenger, he wouldn't have had to fight them. He did not hear the Islamic call to prayer, so he invaded. When he invaded, he wanted to get the money, so he went to the treasurer of the community. The Muslims captured him. His name was Kinana, and he had his followers build a fire, on Kinana's chest to torture him until he revealed where the treasury was. Kinana refused to do so and was ultimately put to death. Then his wife, Safiya bint Huwai, was also captured and given to Muhammad. Now this is a woman who's not only her husband had just been killed, but her father was also had just been killed by the Islamic warriors in Khaybar. And yet Islamic tradition says that Muhammad married her, consummated the marriage on the fucking spot. Can you imagine this absolutely ghastly scene of dead bodies everywhere, and Muhammad being so consumed with lust that he has to stop in the midst of these dead bodies and rape this woman? But this is also exemplary behavior, because Muhammad is an excellent example of conduct. This is what happened. This is the fucking Muhammad, the man. This is what Islam is based on, this shit. Fuck. And people go on about the Epstein files. Look, the whole fucking religion is based on fucking child rape. Well, it is. It's right on the fucking writing. Consequently, you have all over Europe, for example, nowadays with the mass Muslim migration since 2015, a huge increase in sexual assaults and rapes of non-Muslim women there. And you have all of this, of course, in India with the kidnapping, the abduction of Hindu girls, Sikh girls, Christian girls, and there they are to submit, subjected to the same treatment otherwise. This is all because this is something that Muhammad did. And it's also specified in the Qur'an in chapter 4, verse 3, that you can marry up to 4 women, 4 girls, but also take the captives of the right hand. And the captives of the right hand are these infidel girls specified in chapter 33, verse 50 of the Qur'an to be the spoils of war, and that is seized in battle, just like Safiya bin Huwai, and used in this matter. All of these things come back to Muhammad many years ago. Did you hear what I just said then? The spoils of war are the fucking wives and the daughters of the men that you kill in battle. It's like the chocolate, mate, the bonus on top. You get to rape all the girls because they're just horny, dirty, fucking perverted, pedophile fucks. Excuse my language. You don't hear it so much anymore, but many years ago, right after the United States got involved in Iraq and in Afghanistan, there were many news accounts that actually had Muslim pathologists claiming that beheading was completely against Islam and had nothing to do with Islam. But this is once again, as is often the case, based on the counting on the ignorance of the audience, not to be able to understand that they were being deceived. We are all being deceived. What we hear about Islam, the peaceful fucking, it's all a load of crap. This is what I'm telling you now is what Islam is. In reality, beheading is specified in the Qur'an. When you meet the unbelievers, strike the necks, chapter 47, verse 4. Consequently, the Muslims, according to Islamic tradition, Muhammad practiced beheading. He beheaded between 600 and 900 Jews of the Qurayza tribe that he claimed had betrayed him. And this was in accord with the Qur'an. This is what it says. This is what Muhammad did. Whatever Muhammad did, because he's a man of conduct, of exemplary conduct for Islam and for Muslims to follow him in his ways. And this is what he did. He fucking beheaded between 600 and 900 Jews. He raped tons of kids. He says you can have up to 4 wives, and before puberty it's better to claim them. This is normal practice for a Muslim. Then in a court, for example, you have the beheading whenever there is a conflict between Muslims and non-Muslims. You see this all the time, as a matter of fact. Just this morning, before beginning, I was reading this news article about the protests in Kazakhstan, and that you may have heard about. And 12 policemen were killed by the protesters. One of them was beheaded. This is just happening. It's happening now. It's happening in Africa right now as I speak. This sort of thing. When you see a story like this, it is absolutely a direct result of the example of Muhammad. And of course, that's just one very small example. Hundreds and thousands of such stories from all over the world that can be adduced in this connection. Muhammad also taught that anyone who leaves Islam is to be killed. Whoever changes his religion is to be killed. As a result of that teaching, which is also continued and taught by all these schools and the schools of law and the various sects of Islam, they all still teach whoever changes his religion, kill him. Those who leave Islam are under an immediate death threat. And you can look at what has happened with Wasim Rizvi since he left Islam, and all that inundation of death threats that he has received. This is because of Muhammad. This sort of thing is normal. Every bit of the activity that you can see for Muslims in the modern world today is a tribute. It can be traced directly back to the example of Muhammad. Consequently, this is the primary responsibility of non-Muslims governing officials, law enforcement officials, and intelligence officials. If they want to deal with this problem adequately, they have to confront the fact that these values are what are being taught in mosques all over the world, because Muhammad, as the example, the excellent example, is still being taught everywhere. Treatment of Jewish tribes, beheadings, enslavements, and forced conversions. It's just a matter of course. Every religion is going to teach what it teaches. And this is what Islam teaches. This is what Islam teaches. But there's tremendous, almost universal denial about this. It's so frustrating. And every non-Muslim politician in the West, from Merkel, who's no longer Chancellor of Germany, but I'm sure that her successor is just as bad. Macron in France, Boris Johnson is not anymore, but whoever the new fucking freak in the UK, certainly Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and all their predecessors, with the arguable exception, maybe the arguable exception of Trump, but not the complete exception of Trump. Every last one of them teaches, and the Pope as well, and every Western authority teaches that Islam is a religion of peace. That has nothing to do with terrorism. I'm sure this is true also in India. Every non-Muslim state seems to be absolutely fanatically committed to the idea that Islam is peaceful. So, and you just talk to people, but don't forget that Islam is peaceful. Fuck, mate, did you not hear what I just said before? What I just told you? None of that, did that sound peaceful to you? Beheading, fucking raping. And these are not just these are girls, these are children, for God's sake. Fuck, this is paedophilia at its worst. And the whole religion is based on. The first thing that we have to acknowledge is that it's not fucking peaceful. Muhammad taught warfare. He engaged in warfare. And he left an example of warfare and subjugation for his people. And that if we do not confront this, if we're not realistic about this, it's just going to keep on going on. One thing that could be done by non-Muslim states, if they have the courage, would be to say that Muslims are perfectly free to practice their religions, and in these various countries, but only insofar as they do not conflict with the law of the land. And so efforts to engage in violence against non-Muslims, to subjugate them, to impose Sharia, would be unacceptable and prosecuted fully. Were that to happen, along with prosecution of child marriage, polygamy, and also in anything else that comes from Muhammad's example, the world would be a much different place. I can give you one example. In the closing, there was a training camp discovered in the United States a few years ago in New Mexico, in a remote area. The training camp was actually taking children and training them to be suicide bombers. And the idea was that they would go to these schools and blow themselves up and kill large numbers of other children. And this was being run by a man named Siraj bin Wahaj, who was the son of a very prominent Islamic spokesman in the United States. Siraj ibn Wahaj had several wives. He had actually come to the attention of the law enforcement previously for leaving one wife without divorcing her and marrying another. Polygamy is ostensibly illegal in the United States, but because the United States is primarily interested in not appearing to be Islamophobic, nothing was done about Siraj ibn Wahaj polygamy. And so he went to New Mexico and started this Jihad training camp. If this polygamy had been prosecuted, he would be as would be normal, because it's illegal, then he wouldn't have been free to start this jihad training camp. If the United States and other states were consistent in applying their own laws to Muslims, which they're not doing because they're too afraid, they're intimidating, and they want to accommodate them. They're intimidated and they want to accommodate them. Then there would be a great deal less jihad activity around the world. But that is unfortunately just the opposite of what is happening. Huh? Did you hear that? Did you hear all that? My fucking God. This is what's going on. This is the peaceful Muhammad. Oh, what an exemplary man he is. What an example. Muslims, you good one, mate.